going to get started with a special presentation prior to the board meeting. I'd like to introduce Adam Boss from Hudson Valley Pattern for Progress. Going to talk about EV charging.
Thank you. Everyone hear me? All right, everyone can hear me. I'm going to take this out. Okay. Yeah. I'm going to take it out. I do better when I hold the mic. So thanks everyone for having me. I realized I was supposed to be at a meeting a few months ago. Didn't end up on my calendar somehow, so I apologize, but I promise I'm here in 3 dimensions tonight. So Hudson Valley Pattern for Progress, I think many of you know who we are. We're a nonprofit founded back in 1965 by the region's academic, business, and nonprofit leaders to provide the region with independent research and planning on topics that matter. So we're working on things like housing and downtown revitalization, infrastructure, transportation, lots of other stuff. Every year we try to pick one big project that we're going to focus a lot of our research capacity on. And last year it was to look at electric vehicle charging infrastructure across the region for 2 reasons. One, as many of you know, because of some car manufacturer policies, government policies, climate change related reasons, we're getting ready to change the way that we fuel our transportation. I don't make the rules. Some people are upset with them, but the rules as of now are that in 2035, we're not selling any more internal combustion engines in New York. That's the rule. So we wanted to put together a project to help the region understand where we have charging now, where we don't, where we need it, or equally important, where we should not have it, because this infrastructure does not belong everywhere. I'll go over that as I go through this presentation. The other thing we wanted to do through this project was this. There's a lot of money out there right now. It's more than $3 billion that we're eligible for here in the Hudson Valley to tap into to install EV charging infrastructure. It's our experience that the region that has the plan is more competitive for the money. The federal government just put out its first notice of funding opportunity on the first 700 million of $2.5 billion for charging stations. Last month we put out a bulletin. I'm sure many of you received it. So we wanted to put together this study so that this region was ready, competitive, thinking about this, because the planning horizon is only like 10 years. And you all know, you guys put together 10-year, 5-year capital plans for your towns. 10 years comes up on you fast. So I'm going to go through the findings of the study and some of the recommendations that are in it. And I'm going to speak very quickly. So right now, this number has changed. There's about 85,000. These numbers are accurate as of November, which is when we finished the study. I have updated numbers. I'm going to go through them verbally. We have about 85,000 fully electric vehicles on the road across New York State right now. The rate of ownership is going up pretty quick. 5 years ago, fully electric cars were only 1 out of every 100 new cars purchased. Now it's about 1 out of every 16. And that's really taking off quite quickly. So the market share for all electric vehicles is growing fast. Here in the Hudson Valley, we're actually up to over 18,000 fully electric vehicles on the road. It's over 18,000 in New York City as well, and it's over 22,000 now in Long Island. We also wanted to look at the surrounding states. There's now over 90,000 fully electric vehicles on the road in New Jersey, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania. The reason we wanted to fold that in, you're going to hear me talk later about a word called use case, which is how do we know where to install electric charging, where it belongs, where it doesn't belong. One of the big use cases is on tourism. Now people are starting to make a decision about where they go and where they stay based on where there's charging. And so we're not just installing charging for our neighbors to use. We're not only installing charging for people driving through the region on their way somewhere else, but we have to think about installing charging to make sure we keep a good foothold on the tourism market share that we have here in the region. And much of that tourism market share comes from the metropolitan area and the states that immediately surround us. So you want to make sure you understand that piece of it as well. Going through here, just looking at rate of adoption, it was on an exponential trend before the pandemic. I think all of you know what happened to car manufacturing during the pandemic, but this is just a sense of how many more we expect to see on the road here in the near term. I'm not going to go through this, but there's a number of things driving the speed at which we're seeing electric vehicle adoption. We made a full list of them here. This list is broken in half. Everything you see in gold is a state or federal policy that includes a deadline for the electrification of passenger vehicles. Everything in purple is a car manufacturer's goal. So between the car manufacturers and public policy, those two things are, no pun intended, driving us quickly toward electric transportation. You can go through them. Some of the big dates are in the early to mid 2030s. We're working with a community school district right now on a plan for their buses. That's a difficult one. That 2035 is not only for passenger vehicles but for buses in New York, and that's a big challenging one. So, as I mentioned, one of the reasons we wanted to do this study was to get the region ready for all these funding opportunities that are coming out. I mentioned there was $2.5 billion in the bipartisan infrastructure law for charging. There's $701 million across New York State that's being made available from the electric utilities to install the electric infrastructure that's needed to bring the quantity of electric to the site where we're installing charging. There's $175 million coming into the state again through the federal government to initially build out the charging infrastructure on our highway corridors. But surprise, surprise, we only need about 30 million of that to build out the corridors. So the other 145 million, the state's going to program out in some other way to help communities. So again, an opportunity that we should be looking at. There's also a bunch of tax credits involved. So where are we now? I just want to show, we did quite a bit of GIS mapping just to show a little bit about where we are now. Right now in the region, across the 9 counties, we have about 400 charging stations. 349 of those are level 2 chargers. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the parlance here, a level 2 charger is a charger that's generally used in a home charging situation. So a level 2 charger will get you 25 additional miles of travel for every hour that you're plugged in. So these are utterly useless if you're driving from here to Boston, okay? But they are totally useful if, like me, you have one in your garage and you plug in overnight and every morning you wake up and you're fully charged. That's the use case for those. The use case for those is also at some of our tourism sites where people are staying overnight, or places where people generally are spending somewhere between 4 to 6 hours. We have seen some of these installed across the region in places where I will repeat, they are utterly useless. My favorite one is at the Kohl's in Kingston. They have it connected to a big digital display board. You can go in there and plug in for free. Not even my mom goes to Kohl's for 5 hours. So again, we have to think about where these are useful and where they are useless. The level 2s, there is a role for them, but they are not going to help people get to and through and from our region. So this just shows you where all the chargers are up here. Go ahead, you have a question? Yeah, the whole question. Yeah, because I'm gonna try to zip through this sucker here. So this shows you all the 20-minute drive time. It's loading. 20-minute drive time from a charger of any kind. Okay. Good news here. Unless you're on top of Wittenberg Mountain in the middle of the Catskills, you're generally within a 20-minute drive time of a charger of some kind when you're in the region. Now, much of our study focused on fast charging. So here again, here are the level 2 chargers, but here are the fast chargers. You'll notice the difference. So when you whittle this down to fast chargers, the fast chargers tend to be in 2 places. I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but they tend to be up the Thruway corridor and in the southern part of the region, okay? You'll see if you do a 20-minute drive time analysis of the fast chargers, now the region's not quite as covered as it was when we looked at all the chargers. In fact, there's some pretty big population centers here that are not within a 20-minute drive time, like Port Jervis, for instance, in Orange County, which is, a major city within the region. So we're a little bit, we have some holes in our game here. I told my friends in Greene County, they're the only county that doesn't have a single fast charger at all whatsoever. And yet they have, how many, 2, 3 ski resorts that people are coming to from the cone of influence where you actually need charging to get back to where you come from. So we have some holes in our game when it comes to the fast charging that we need to fill with the money that's out there. I'm going to skip this. Suffice to say, most of our fast chargers are at what you would call shopping plazas and markets or throughway rest stops. You'll see here the brown slice in the upper right corner is 22% of them are actually at car dealerships. Those are kind of not even really available in the sense that those car dealerships are generally using those fast chargers for their purposes. If you bought a car of that model, they may let you come and plug in, but those are not really like out there and available to be used. So about a fifth of our chargers aren't necessarily even available. There's a great international group that's done a lot of studies on what the right ratio is. And the right ratio, according to folks who've studied this, is about one charger for every 10 cars. And you can see across the region, we have varying degrees of, meeting that ratio. So, and it's for different reasons. So for instance, over in Putnam County, they've had a high level of adoption of EVs, but they haven't really installed much charging at all. They haven't paid a lot of attention to it. In Ulster County, there's been a pretty good level of adoption, but they've been very aggressive very early on, even going back to 5, 6, 7 years ago, trying to install charging infrastructure. Westchester County, very different, right? Very, very, very high rate of adoption, but also they've been aggressive in getting the charging out. Here in Columbia County, right, a little bit lower level of adoption, and that's why your ratio is down actually better than what the experts would suggest. I'm not going to read through these, but we did sort of a county by county analysis of opportunities of where charging might be helpful. I'll make sure the link gets out so you can read this. I want to just make sure I get onto some really helpful stuff here. So looking forward, I want to talk about the sources of money that you folks should be interested in, okay? The first source of money is from that NEVI program. The NEVI program is the federal program that's going to go to build out the highway charging infrastructure. Right now, one of the problems we have along the highways is a queuing problem. Most of our charging stations on the highways only have 1 or 2 plugs. So if you drive up and you go to plug in your car, but someone got there before you, you might be stuck waiting there 20 minutes and then your 20 minutes. If 2 people got there before you, you're waiting 20. So we got to deal with this problem of queuing, and this initial money is meant to help deal with that. The rules in this money is it's meant to install at least 4 plugs no further apart than 50 miles along designated highway corridors. And you can see where those corridors are. These are the statewide corridors, okay? And then you can zoom in on the region and see where the local corridors are. State money, very important here. The folks who've been doing most of the work on the state level is New York Power Authority. They have a program called Evolve New York that's trying to install 800 new fast chargers across the state by 25. I've seen a lot of them popping up all over the place. They're being very aggressive with this. This is a good program. Reach out to NYPA and understand where here in Columbia County they may be able to install some that would be helpful, that would be strategically in the right place. I'm going to talk about strategy in a minute. Before I get to the utility company funds, I did mention the $2.5 billion from the federal government. The first $700 million of that is going out this year. I think applications are due early summer. I'll make sure that bulletin gets around to everyone. You can check that out. Now, the utility funds. Talk about the utilities for a minute. The 4 utilities in our region have lots of money available to do the work on the utility side of the meter. So one of the things that's really misunderstood about this is the amount of work and the volume of electricity that the utilities have to bring to these sites to make these charging stations actually happen. I'm going to talk about this in a minute, but what this will pay for is up to 90% of the utility side of the meter work, which can be very expensive because in many cases, to get that volume of electricity to the site, the electric utility has to perhaps put another bank on a substation or install new transformers, new circuitry, higher capacity wires. The work is actually pretty significant. This funds that work up to 90%, and for disadvantaged communities up to 100%. We have the map of disadvantaged communities here linked in the study. And as you can see, most of our utilities, certainly you're not in the Con Edison group, so you don't have to worry about them, have 90% or more of their money remaining. So that money is out there sitting, waiting to be used. Now, let's talk about the utilities for a second. Every bank of fast chargers you see is the same draw on the grid as a 1,000 unit apartment building. I repeat, every bank of fast chargers you see is a small skyscraper. It's important to understand that. Why? Because the utility company's business processes are not set up to deliver that volume of electricity to a place quickly, right? So they're set up, a skyscraper, building that size goes through a planning process, a design process, an approval process, a construction process. They get 2, 3, 4 years notice to bring that quantity of electricity to a site. Now they got people calling them up saying, hey, I'd like to install some fast chargers. Can you be here next month? And they're, no, we can't do that. Because oftentimes you have to do an engineering analysis. There has to be new infrastructure installed. It's actually a lot of work. So we have to be sensitive to this and be prepared. And how do we be prepared? Well, one of the things that we can do is make sure we reach out to the electric utilities early and often. Very, very important. When we have projects that may want to install charging, make sure they're in touch with the utilities as early as possible. The other thing we can do is make sure we understand the capacity maps. I'm sure some of you have seen these before, but every single one of our utilities has an online capacity map. Again, I'm going to oversimplify this a little bit, but the capacity maps generally use like a red, yellow, green system. If it's green, if the electric distribution lines coming through your part of the region are green, that generally means there's enough capacity on those lines to support charging. Again, I'm generalizing. If it's yellow, it's a coin flip depending on how many chargers and what power of chargers you want to install. If it's red, chances are you're going to have to wait 12, 16, 20 months for them to do a major infrastructure project to bring that energy to that site. So you can start by looking at the capacity maps, understand where you're at and what kind of work may need to be done. I want to underscore the amount of work that has to be done by the utilities is daunting. The way we are going now and trying to electrify things, if we electrify the heating and the cars in every home, that triples the draw on the grid of every single family home in the region. That's a lot of work. Now we ask the utilities, are you worried about generation? The answer is not for now, okay? They're not worried for the next 10, 15, 20 years. That's what they tell us, okay? But in the future, that's going to be hard. And you know what that means for our region in the past? That generally means transmission issues, right? I mean, we've been through this before, especially down in Orange County, right? Especially in Sullivan County. You guys remember the great transmission wars of the late 90s and early 2000s, because although our region, and especially to the south, is where most of those electrons are consumed, it's often not where they're produced. So you have to get those electrons from where they're produced to where they're consumed, and that puts us right in what you think of as like the transmission corridor, right? So just prepare yourselves. There's going to be a lot of that ahead in the decades to come. Let's be honest about it. The finances of EV charging right now do not work. They do not work, okay? A fast charging system installs requires somewhere between $250,000 to $1 million to install. The busiest of them break even over the life of the equipment now. But also, I'm going to be honest with you, this is a chicken and the egg situation. The state and our policymakers are left to ask, okay, do we install the chargers so that people have the confidence to buy electric vehicles, or do we allow people to buy the electric vehicles so we have enough volume of charging to pay for the chargers? And the policymakers have decided, hey, you've got to front load the charging so that people have the confidence to buy the vehicles, and that's the direction we've gone in, which is why many of the charging systems you see out there right now are subsidized in some way to get that charging out there. Real quick, I'm going to go through these last few sections. It is important to understand these charging stations do not belong everywhere. Again, their draw on the grid, the amount of money they cost, just the heft of the infrastructure is significant enough that we need to be very strategic about where we install these. Strategic so that people can get to and through the region, but also strategic so that we are drawing people into the region by having charging available for them. I live in Saugerties. I often have to drive down to Westchester County for business. When I have to drive down to Westchester County for business, I know I have to charge on the way home. Right now, I am stuck charging in the parking lot of a Walmart in Newburgh, where I get to watch seagulls eat garbage for 20 minutes. That ain't great. Now, if Newburgh had a charging in one of their downtown parking lots, I could spend that 20 minutes going to a local restaurant to have a quick bite to eat, or one of the cafes, or doing something like that. We are seeing some of the cities in our region start to think strategically about this and site the fast chargers just off the highway where they have locally owned businesses that people can spend 20 or 30 minutes. And that's an important part of this mix. So let's talk real quick. Highway corridors, I don't think I have to explain that. That one's pretty obvious. We got to get people to and through the region. Hospitals, two reasons for that. You'll see police stations and near substations around here as well. Hospitals, police stations, substations, these are places that tend to stay electrified even when the power's out because of the redundant amount of feeds that go to them, okay? The other piece of the hospitals are, you never know when you might need to go to the hospital. It might not be when your car is fully charged, right? So we got to make sure that we have charging there. Main streets, I'm going to show you why at the end of this report. Part of this study is we wrote a model zoning ordinance for multifamily housing. Why? Because about 97% of the charging happens at home, right? 97% of the charging happens at home. And that's why I continue to say, like, this is the biggest transition since the time we went from the horse to the car. This is as big a transition because now we're fueling at home for the first time. The question is, what happens when you don't have control of your electric panel? What happens when you can't just go install a little charger in your garage because you don't own the place where you live? You're still going to have a car. Come 2035, you're not going to be able to buy an internal combustion car. So we have to make sure that there's charging available for people who live in multifamily settings. We worked with the municipal lawyers on our board of directors to write a model zoning ordinance that took the best of the ideas from places like Vermont and Massachusetts and other places and put them all together in one spot. I've mentioned municipal parking lots already, very important. I mentioned this already. Parks, they can be helpful at parks. And then, of course, tourism attractions, very, very important, especially for a place like Columbia County. I'm going to zip through this real quick. Some best practices. Our study actually came up with some best practices and some policy recommendations. I'm not going to go through all of them for the sake of time, but I want to highlight a few. We have to start creating business cases for charging, okay? I've had a lot of people since we did this study call up our office and say, we think we want to install charging here, here, and here. And we've talked with them for 20 minutes and they've left that phone conversation going, those ideas were terrible, okay? It's important for all of us to ask, who's coming to this location? Where are they coming from? From how far away are they traveling to get there? How long will they be in this location for? And as we start to ask some of those questions, we can then decide, should we have charging there at all? Should it be level 2? Should it be level 3 fast charging? But we need to make a use case for why we are deciding to put charging in certain places and not in certain places. It's very important, again, not only because of the cost, but because of the draw, the burden that it puts on the grid. Future proofing is important. In a place where you need 4 chargers now, 5 years from now, you might need 8. Make sure you're installing enough ductwork, enough concrete pads, all that stuff so that you don't have to open up the ground many, many times. Hire a licensed electrician goes without saying. We are seeing some IDAs now in the region say to projects that include big parking lots, parking garages, public facilities. They're saying install charging stations or you're not getting benefits. We are seeing this in the region now, okay? Not in all cases, but in cases where there is a true use case for having it there. EV ready before you pave, obviously that makes sense. If you're doing a paving project downtown, just think about whether there should be some there. I'm going to skip down to some policy recommendations. I already mentioned the multifamily zoning code that we wrote. You can click it here again. We have municipal lawyers, very seasoned ones, go over it so that you could literally put the name of your town on it, fill in a few gaps, have a public hearing and adopt it if that's what you want to do. Here's a big problem I've been talking to our federal representatives about. It makes total sense to have charging on park and rides, pull-off areas, highway facilities. But guess what? Right now, not allowed. Why? Because there's a provision of federal code that says anything built with federal highway money after 1960 cannot have commercial activities on it. There's 2 commercial activities that were carved out of this. Both of them have to do with human vices. Who would like to guess what they are?
OTD.
Close. Scratch off lottery tickets is one of them. Soda vending machines specifically, yep. So I say, hey, if we can have those two things, we should at least be able to have some charging, because here's the thing. It makes sense in these places because they're publicly owned. If you have to have them just off the highways, now you're dealing with private land leases. Things get pretty complicated pretty quickly. So we're working, trying to get that fixed. The unanswered question of quantity, there's no central brain that's monitoring how often each charging station is used, so that you can see in a place, hey, these are getting busy all the time and we have queuing here, so you need to install some more soon. There's no sort of like central traffic control to understand which of the chargers are busy in places where we need to install new ones. Standardized plugs and payment. Right now I have 7 apps on my smartphone that I need to scan to charge at different places. If we cannot make this as simple as a gas station where you pull up and swipe a card and all the plugs are the same, then my mother is not going to do this. Okay? It's that simple. It needs to be simple for people to have confidence in it. I say to people all the time, imagine going to Target to buy a toaster, but you don't know if you can plug it in when you get home. We need to standardize it. It's very, very important. And now I'm just going to skip down to the end, show you a couple things. I'll skip over my ugly head charge in my car. We have a whole guide to funding down here, but we also have further questions. We're starting to see this out west. People running chargers from their house across the sidewalk to their car that's parked in the street. We need to think about this. Just like, is this going to happen? Probably. What are we going to do about it? What are the rules we're going to have in place to make sure public safety is protected, right? We got to think about that stuff. In Europe, they're getting a little creative. In the UK and in Germany, they're doing tests where they're increasing the voltage of their street lamps and having little charging modules installed in the body of the street lamps. Again, that's in a trial phase, but it's an example of some countries that are just trying to get crafty and try to understand how two similar uses can compete with or can complement one another. And then I'm going to end with this. What you're going to see here, I think whenever we do something new, it's good to just pause for a second and say, hey, are we doing this right? Okay. What you're going to see here in the next 3 minutes is a battery swapping station in China. In China, they've standardized everything. They've standardized the chassis, the way the battery hooks into the chassis, and the way the battery hooks into the drivetrain so that you can drive into what looks like a Jiffy Lube, get lifted up by a robot, have a robot take your empty battery off, replace it with a full battery, and in 3 minutes, you are off with a full battery and driving. We're not there yet, but the question is, as we start to really like ramp up to install these charging stations, I think charging stations are going to be part of the mix for quite a while. But do we need to start thinking about this sort of stuff too? I think it's important. It doesn't matter if it's EV charging or anything that we do in civic society. Whenever we're doing something new, it's always good to just tap the brakes and also ask, is there a better way, a different way, a more efficient way to do this thing we're trying to do? And this is just an example that we came across in our research that we thought was pretty cool. So that's the end. I tried to go through this quickly. I think there's a lot of useful information in here. Again, we have guides to working with the utilities, guides to funding, the model zoning, and a guide to best practices and policy recommendations. And really, we just hope this is helpful as everyone starts to wrap their minds around what are we going to need in our community. I'll just end with one quick story. When I was a young journalist, weekly newspaper reporter in my early 20s, down in the village of Montgomery in Orange County, there's this guy, Ed Devitt, who took me into the basement of the library. And you may know Montgomery is a very colonial village. And he took me down to the basement of the library. He showed me all the old hitching posts from colonial Montgomery. And he said to me, can you believe we went from the hitching post to the gas station? And I think of that all the time because now I find myself going, can you believe we're getting ready to go from the gas station to some other thing? For now, it's the charging station. But it's a pretty big transition that we really have to think about and plan for and be smart about. So I hope in some small way that this study helps people sort of get a grasp of what it is we need to do, at least in the near term, to get through this transition. So happy to answer any questions if you have them. I hope it's helpful.
How are we gonna address the eventual mandate for commercial traffic?
For commercial vehicles?
Well, if you have tractor trailers that have to charge at the same stations that,
Yeah, I wish I had a good answer for you. I think in the near term, I don't remember if, is there a target yet for the big commercial vehicles? I don't think there's a target for that yet. The one that's coming at us faster is the one for school buses. And that one's difficult because it really changes the rhythm of the way the schools fuel their transportation, in the sense that even if you have a small district, you might have 40, 50, 60 buses. You tell me you're going to install 40, 50, 60 charging stations, some mixture of level 2s, which, by the way, level 2 is just a dryer plug, right? It's a 240 service. It's not a huge deal, right? Are you going to install that many 240 services, or do you need that with a mix of fast charging? Because, hey, I can't remember who you guys play in sports, but for me, it would be like if I went from, if the city of Kingston was going to go down and play Monroe Woodbury in Southern Orange County, that bus driver is going to have to charge up at Monroe Woodbury to get those kids back to Kingston, right? So you're going to have some fast charging for that. So I think the one that's coming up on us quicker, that's going to sort of bedevil the region a little bit, is probably the buses, because there's not, I don't think, a well-defined target for like construction vehicles and tractor trailers.
who's gonna pay for the buses?
Yeah, right now, there's a couple federal because the buses are expensive.
Yeah.
The buses are super expensive. They're like somewhere in the $300,000 bus rate. So right now there's some big federal programs, one that's around $5 billion to pay for the buses, but it's a big challenge. Yeah. Yes.
So my town, New Lebanon, is right on the Route 20 and 22 corridor. We
Yeah.
have a ton of traffic going through from, the Mass Pike to Vermont and everywhere else. So we did a charging station, but it's one of those level 2s. But that's the only funding that's available. So if what I'm hearing is correct, which when you're on a main thoroughfare like we are, you really need that level 1 because nobody wants to sit in New Lebanon for 5 hours. Sorry, level 3. But the funding, the last I looked, which wasn't that long ago, is not available for those fast chargers.
So most of the funding that I just talked about is available for some of these fast chargers, right? So the first iteration of funding in New York that was available was only for level 2s. And the way they funded it was they actually took like polluter money. So if someone polluted and they had to sign a consent order, that consent order usually comes with a fine, right? And they took that money and they pooled it up and they made it available so that people could not only install some level 2s, but also the electricity was free for a period of, let's call it 2 years, I think, or something like that. So that was an initial program. I think that was out of DC, maybe.
Yeah, that's what
That's what you got, I figured. So now transitioning into NIPA and some of these other programs, they're really focused on the fast chargers because, again, that reduces what they call charging anxiety in the sense that you're not worried about pulling up to a charger like yours. And if I'm an hour away from home, I might have to wait 3 hours at that charger to get enough distance to get home. Now you're talking at a level 3 charger, most cars can fill 80% of their battery in like 15 minutes, 10, 15, 20 minutes, right? So that's what most of these programs are now aimed at.
Okay, thank you.
But
Yes.
I understand that with these fast charges, it puts a heck of a lot more load on the infrastructure.
Oh, yeah.
Because,
How
you
many
know,
amps is that?
Well, so it puts out somewhere between 50 to 300 kilowatts. Yeah, it's a direct current.
It's a big generator for that thing, right?
That's a big, it's a big
So
load.
is the grid really set up? I mean, I know it's not at this point.
Not in all places, no. And that's why those capacity maps are so important because you'll see it's really,
It's not only the grid that I'm talking about, it's actually, they talk about fossil fuels and everything, and we're feeding generators for fossil fuels.
well, yeah. I tell
So where's
people,
that going? I mean, have you?
yeah, I tell people, we didn't get into that in this study. I tell people all the time, I'm completely cognizant that when I plug my car in, 72% of the electrons going into my car were made out of gas fuel.
So one other question, keeping it more related.
Yeah.
So us as a county, when we put a charging system in, we want probably level 2s because at this point, these other ones are pretty much expensive, you know what I mean? But the infrastructure to get that, like, you put 3 units in there and you got 3 or 4 units with 48 breakers. I mean, you need a hell of electrical service to get there. Who's paying for that to even get a pole to us. Do we have to pay for that pole, or is nine?
So the level two shouldn't be a problem, because again, that's like a dryer phone, right? I mean, you can get those pretty much, you can put those pretty much anywhere, right?
Yeah.
It's the level threes where you're gonna really, but to answer your question,
We start adding them up though.
yeah, the utilities were required through, I think through the PSC, they were required to set aside a certain amount of funds to pay for exactly that stuff.
So we can get
Wires,
some
poles.
funding.
That's right. So disadvantaged communities get 100% reimbursement, and then other communities are getting somewhere between 80 and 90% on the reimbursement. And yeah,
They're publicly accessible.
that's the way. Yeah, they have to be publicly accessible. Yeah, but that's the
So we've looked at it for the county where we might just do some fleet car. That's interest in changing some of the fleet cars to that. I think for that, we could deal with level twos for our fleet vehicles.
Yes.
But making it publicly accessible on the locations where we want to store our county vehicles isn't the same thing, so.
And then your planning department or others may know there are programs that are specific to fleets.
Right.
So you got an additional
Yeah.
program there you can be. Yep. Yes.
So is the state or the utilities, which are often regional, are they
Yeah.
doing, projecting where they're gonna run these transmission lines to fulfill these needs? Because if we're a proactive community and we get ahead of our neighbors or whatever, we want these things, but it doesn't mean that there may be a lot of towns in between us and where the power exists. So-
Well, so the big transmission lines are a whole nother story, right? I mean, there are two that have been recently permitted by the state. One, I'm sure you're familiar with, is gonna come down through the Hudson River. That's bringing the hydroelectricity out of Canada. And then there's the other one that's gonna come down out of Western New York through the Catskills. But those are bringing big, gigantic, loads down into the southern part of the state. These sort of transmission lines are sort of intermediate lines that have to eventually be stepped down to provide the service to businesses and to homes. And those upgrades are really on a utility by utility level. And so they know it's almost like refueling an airplane mid-flight, right? They have to run the grid, they have to worry about reliability, operability, but they're sort of upgrading it as they run it because the demand for electricity is going up. And if things work the way the state hopes, which never happens, so the goal would be that you're increasing your electric reliance at the same rate that you're reducing the fuel reliance, except for right now, the state's broken up into two grids. Again, I'm oversimplifying, but there's the southern grid and there's the northern and western grid. In the northern and western grid, they have about 60% clean energy because they have a lot of legacy hydro up in the western and northern parts of the state. Down here, I think we only have 28% renewables because we don't have that same big portfolio. We don't have the space, by and large, for a lot of that. So it's a really, again, we didn't get that into that new study, and I would not pretend to be an expert on it. It's a really complicated mix of generation, transmission, consumption, and the place where you need each is often not in the same place.
We're gonna need to wrap this up. One more question.
The charging, stations.
Yeah.
So Stewart shops, for instance, right?
Yeah.
I happen to know some people that are up, in the company, and they were telling me that it's been the best thing because they've been kind of following what's going on.
Yeah.
So when these guys go in and plug their car in, and it's, you fill up your gas, you're out there a few minutes and you're done. But they're going in there and they're eating and
Yeah.
they're getting coffee and then they're doing, so they've been tracking who's charging and what they've been eating and what they've been buying, and their sales have been dramatically going up
So
on that area.
I know we're out of time, but I just want to hit on this because it's at the very end of our study, which is the question of what happens to gas stations. So Stewart's and Moravido are the two companies I know that have been a little ahead of the curve in terms of trying to install some and thinking about as their market share on the fuel goes down, they want to make sure they're making up for it. But you're also pointing out they then get this captive audience for a period of time that will buy other stuff. But the other thing to think about, and I know this, I used to work for New York City Water Supply System where we had a lot of underground storage tanks. I mean, think about all these underground storage tanks that are out there that are eventually, there's a lot of funky things involved in this mix and in the transition that reflected in our study because it wasn't the main focus of our work. But this whole market share with gas stations, I met someone the other day who was putting in a proposal to build a new gas station. I just asked the guy, like, why? I mean, why would you do that now? It seems like a really poor business choice. But anyway, it's an interesting thing.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, the first special committee meeting is Public Works. Ron, you want to?
Sure, I'd like to call a special Public Works to order. Public Works members, we have a resolution before us authorizing the chairman of the board of supervisors to award and execute a construction contract. I call on our Commissioner Ray Drakowski to explain why we're having this special meeting.
Thank you, everyone. Recently, the county has received construction costs or construction bids for the Valley View Bridge replacement. That's been an ongoing project through the Bridge New York funding program. We recently received bids. 2 bids were open. The apparent low bidder was A. Colarusso and Sons, in the amount of $2,193,903. And the request is to authorize the chairman to enter into contract with Colarusso and Sons to continue with that project to get the bridge replaced.
I'll move it.
Second. Motion is second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion to adjourn?
Thanks, Greg.
This is county government.
Okay, I'd like to bring the county government meeting, special meeting to order, for resolution 174. Before I read that is, I do have a request, Rob, that if you could fill in, they'd like to hear more about this from the board. Some of the board members would like to hear something about this. Explain it to them. Requesting home rule legislation in New York State legislator authorizing the County of Columbia to extend local legislation imposing an additional 1% tax on sale of compensating uses within the County of Columbia.
Yeah, so every 2 to 3 years, we need to renew these sales tax extenders. Our budget is very dependent upon sales tax and has been for a long time. To do that, the state doesn't give us ongoing authority at all times. So we have to actually get the New York State Senate and Assembly to both pass a bill that says Columbia County is entitled to charge an additional 1% sales tax. So this resolution is our first ask. After this resolution is passed, it will go to the Senate and Assembly Home Rule Council, where they'll draft the legislation enabling us. And then after that, the Senate and Assembly has to pass it. Usually it's after the budget. Sometimes it's right before the end of their session in June. It can be a nail biter for these. And then after they pass it, we'll do another home rule. After they have the bills, we'll do another home rule resolution that has the Senate and Assembly bill numbers, asking them again to pass the bill. Then it goes to the governor's office. At times it's gotten held up there as well. But then eventually it's been signed, and then we come back here and we either do a local law or resolution, depending on the request, adopting it for the next 2 years. And unfortunately they sunset, so we do this every time. A little bit of a nail biter. So these 2 resolutions that you're seeing from home rule are the first request to the Senate and Assembly to allow us to continue these taxes. They're not, I've said it every 2 years, they're not new. They've been established, and we've been relying upon them in our budgetary process for a long time.
As the town said as well.
There have been discussions about making these perpetual though, right?
Well, during COVID, they gave us a pass that year and they just put it in the budget and let us keep going. One of them, I think it's our mortgage tax. We don't have to get home rule requests anymore, because like 8 years ago when I did it, they said, we're sick of renewing it. We'll give you permanent authority to do that. So yeah, we've been hoping, because a lot of municipalities have these, we've been hoping that they make it permanent legislation. But, politics is politics. A lot of times these get held up. There's upstate, downstate issues. There's local issues. So sometimes these have been used previously as bargaining chips for accommodations on other legislation pieces, which obviously NISAC doesn't like. So they have been advocating to give us more authority on this.
But the renewal would also allow us to review and renew the same purpose for the tax or to change the purpose for the tax, correct?
It's same purpose. Yeah, we would continue to use it for the same.
No, I know with these resolutions, it's the same purpose, but if we renew every 2 years, we can re-examine that purpose.
Sure.
Okay, so that's the nice thing about the renewal. We might want to put it for housing one year instead of.
I'll move R 174.
I'll second it. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, can you motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Oh, I got all of that?
Yeah, there's two.
Okay. 175? Yeah,
I'll second that.
all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Okay, now I need a motion to adjourn.
I'll make the motion.
Okay.
Then you're up.
Yeah, I'd like to call the April 12th Special Finance Committee meeting to order. We're going to start with resolution number 174.
I'll move it.
Second.
Motion and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Resolution number 175.
I'll move it.
Second.
Motion and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Resolution number 176.
I'll move it.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion to adjourn?
I'll move.
Second. Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Okay, next I'm gonna call the, full board meeting to order. Please rise for a moment of silent prayer, followed by the suits of flag. Pledge allegiance to the
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to request the clerk call the roll.
Basson. Weigel.
Here.
Williams.
Here.
Simmons.
Here.
Sacks.
Here.
Adams. Here. Metler.
Here.
Collins.
Here.
Riley. Eldridge. Here. Helsley.
Here.
Kirsten.
Here.
Livonia. Cousin. Mia. Jametis.
Here.
Mussman. Here. Solera.
Here.
Fuzzy.
Here.
Holtling. Here. Morel.
Here.
Not.
Here.
Skoda.
Present.
3105 present, 430 absent. We have a quorum.
Okay, right now we're gonna move on to a public hearing. So I'm gonna call the public hearing to order. It's for Ellis. And I'm gonna ask the clerk to read the notice.
Columbia County will hold a public hearing on April 12th, 2023 at 7 PM at 401 State Street, Hudson, New York, 12534 for the purpose of, development needs and to discuss the submission of an Economic Development, Community Development Block Grant, CDBG application on behalf of Labella of Alacia Inc. The proposed grant application will request up to $261,000 in CDBG economic development funding to assist the local business in acquiring furniture, fixtures, and equipment and creating up to 19 jobs. The hearing will be conducted pursuant to section 571.486, subpart 1 of the CFR and in compliance with the requirements of the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974 as amended. After submission, a copy of the application will be available for public inspection at the county office, dated March 30th, 2023.
Thank you. Do any supervisors have any comments? Does anyone from the public have any comments? Okay, with that, I'm going to close the public hearing. This resolution 169 of 2023 will be voted on when we vote on the other resolutions. Thank you. Next, I would like to welcome Lindy Komet from the Farm Bureau, who's going to do a brief presentation.
Hello. Do you have my slide? I don't know. Yeah. I'm fine. Keep it simple. You said 10 minutes. I'm going quicker. Anyway, you're all stuck with me because, you know, it's the farm bureau and farmers are very overloaded from all. They all say, what a great idea. We should all go. We're not all going. So anyway, my name is Lindy Kimmett and I'm the president of the Columbia County Farm Bureau. And basically, I just wanted to kind of introduce myself in the Farm Bureau because, you know, we actually are here to represent not only farmers, but in doing that, we really are trying to also help local government. So I just wanted to make sure that we're known to you, that you know how to contact us. You know, I just have a couple of brief slides, one of them you can look at. And what you can see here is that agriculture is still a very important part of Columbia County. I mean, you can see it when you drive around here. And actually, my own neighborhood in Southern Columbia County, we kind of a joke that, you know, the last few years, it seems like you turn a corner, you run into people with cows. It's like everybody's got one in their backyard. You know, it's constantly growing. And you can see that we have market value of products over $90 million. We've got 500 farms and growing. And granted, if you look at farm numbers, you know, it seems like there's a lot of growth, even though when you look at the land in farming, it seems to be shrinking. The reality is we have a lot of small dynamic farms that have started. There are a lot of young people coming in and starting sort of niche farms. So it's really a very growing industry. It's actually still creating a lot of jobs for people, a lot of young entrepreneurs coming in. So the reality is that farming in this county is still very important. It's, you know, not only important in providing food security to the population, you see a growing number of farmers markets in the area, but we really are still an industry that is providing a lot of economic benefits to the county. So you can see, you know, a lot of the farms that we have are small. They're generating, you know, just a little $5,000 in sales, maybe $10,000, but they're growing. And they're finding more and more customers and expanding. So those small farms today are actually going to be growing in business in the coming years, and that means employing more people, bringing more revenue to the county. And we also do have a lot of large farms that you know, are producing over $100,000 in revenue. And we do still have a very dynamic dairy industry in this county, which is somewhat surprising. So if you look at this next map, this is just something that our state farm bureaus put together, and it shows where we have members of Farm Bureau within the county. And as you can see, we're pretty much scattered throughout the county. The yellow stars were their board members. So our board members are also kind of scattered around the county. So we are out in the community everywhere. And, you know, the reality is that farmers are very busy. You know, like right now, they're all out there trying to get their fields started. In winter, they're busy trying to fix their equipment. And if they're in the livestock, it never ends regardless of the season. So you might not see them out and about much or even coming here to talk to you, but they're out there. They're in the county. They're everywhere. So if you want to go to the next slide. So anyway, what we're trying to do is I just wanted to come here and let you know that we're also here to help you. I mean, the Farm Bureau is a lobbying organization. We have farm bureaus in all the counties in the state, and then we have a state level farm bureau, which is then tied into the National Farm Bureau. We have a state staff up in Albany County, or up in Albany, and they're great people, very knowledgeable. They have ties into all these other state agencies, get information when needed. And yes, the Farm Bureau's job is to be here for farmers. So we're here to support them, to kind of promote state policies that help the farming industry. But the message I want to get to all of you is that we're also here to try and help towns. I mean, we're all aware that at times there are conflicts between farmers and neighbors. Sometimes conflicts between farmers and local governments. Towns have policies they're trying to implement. Farmers feel that towns are coming after them. You know, you see this sort of dynamic happening all the time. And yes, the Farm Bureau might seem to you as an organization that immediately takes the farmer's position, but our role in outreach is to let farmers know we're here to help them. And they do call us. Oh, I get calls all the time with problems they perceive to be having with the town. And my job is to listen to them, to be someone they trust, who is on their side, so to speak. But it's also the Farm Bureau's job to sometimes help farmers understand that, you know, towns do have to enact certain policies. And there have been cases where I've had farmers come to me very angry about something a town is doing. I go to the state,
I asked them about the rules and regulations on things, we dig into it, and what it's turned out to be is that I'm going back to the farmer and saying, I understand where you're coming from. I recognize what you need to do for your business, but you have to understand the town's perspective. And we can sometimes do a better job of being that liaison between a town and a farmer, because the farmer isn't looking at us as the enemy from the get-go. You know, the farmers understand that we're there to try to help them. So when we try to intercede and resolve problems, we sometimes are more effective at that. So I just want to make sure that, you know, you see us as someone who's not, you know, going to always be coming at you on the farmer's behalf, but really wants to hear your side of things and see if we can find a middle ground, and also sometimes help farmers understand your perspective. So we're here to have you understand farmers' perspectives and then to help understand where you're coming from so that we can reduce conflict and we can work together to basically be partners to help expand job opportunities to counties, help these young farm entrepreneurs grow and be successful. It's really, I think, what all of us want to see. And in the midst of all of this, try to build more regional food security, which I think, you know, we all had the experience of the pandemic of seeing a lot of problems with food security, and farmers really stepped up and were doing the best that they could to feed in food banks, the food markets, to do whatever they could to try to help out. And I think that's the concern that we all share. And farmers are trying to be there to do that. The Farm Bureau and farmers in the region are often donating food to food banks. And a lot of times when people come, these organizations kind of need, farmers kind of look around and say, okay, what sort of leftover farm product can we have, we can just give to try to help out. So we're very much trying to promote that as well. So you can go to the last slide. So I'm again trying to make this very quick. This is our contact information. So my email is there, my phone number is there. Feel free to write it down. Our state representative who can make it this evening, Renee Ciardi, that's her contact information, and she's super at basically going up the level to the state to try to get more information to figure out how to resolve issues. She's been a great backup for us. And most of you, I think almost all of you probably know Willie Endick, who is the vice president of our county farm bureau. So I'm sure you all know how to reach Will, who is supposed to be here, but hey, why give up a vacation in Puerto Rico, right? You know, so what can I say? But you know how to reach Will, I'm pretty sure. So we are both here to help. And I just want to encourage you to be supportive of our industry, to really try to help work with us, work with farmers, to help them be successful. But I also want you to know that if you're having problems with the farm, if there's some conflict brewing, the farmers may have already come to us, but if they haven't, reach out, you know, and sometimes we can help you understand where the farmer's coming from, and maybe you need to change some of the things you're doing. But on the other hand, we can sometimes help the farmer understand where you're coming from. And instead of there being a big problem between towns and farmers or farmers and neighbors, maybe we can figure out some way to resolve it so that everybody is a win-win. And that's kind of the message I just wanted to bring to you tonight. And if any questions, please feel free to ask.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No question.
Do you offer reviews of municipal zoning as it pertain to, you know, ag operations and setbacks and structures and things like that?
Yeah, the State Farm Bureau has, so we have full-time staff, paid full-time staff, and they're very engaged in all of these things. And yes, they can help with that. And in fact, we would welcome any opportunity to, if towns are relooking at zoning, to basically join up and participate and have a discussion. Might be a better way to try to deal with it rather than waiting to kind of implement it and have conflict. I mean, I actually have, just me personally, my graduate work and research was in local government, local policy. So that's a bit my specialty. Now, aside from being a farmer, I do, I work for, actually for the DOD. Surprisingly, I don't realize the military is very much in food security, but I am a food system researcher with them. We look a lot at local governments and local regional food systems. And so yeah, we're very interested in helping out.
Terrific, thank you.
Yes.
I don't know if you could weigh in on this, but we have a resolution before us here tonight that I had brought back from the recent NICET conference in regard to we're opposing the idea of the state changing the makeup of the soil and water boards. I don't know if you're aware of this, but in talking to some staffers at NICET, they tell me this was brought to them by the New York State Farm Bureau, that there was concern that there was some dealing to change that makeup so that the county legislators no longer get to appoint people, Farm Bureau doesn't get to appoint people to the soil and water boards. I don't know if you have any input on that while you're here, because I know there's been some questions from the supervisors. I guess there isn't an actual bill at this moment in time, but I've been told that the Farm Bureau brought this to NICEAG, so NICEAG did a resolution, and several counties have. We have it before us tonight, but.
Yeah, and I wish that Renee would then be here because it's one of her things is politics in the state.
Yeah.
And I can only say that I do know the Farm Bureau has, it's not just that, but there are other boards they've also been looking at, trying to figure out somebody who had more farmer representation. So I'm not really sure the reasoning behind that one. If there was time for it, or if you weren't deciding.
I'm saying that we want to be involved in it. You know, if there's a change in the makeup, we want to be involved.
And, you know, I'm absolutely happy to, again, brings our policy things to you guys, so we can take a look at them as well and give your input. You don't think that's for local government and for local government, Farm Bureau involvement with your policy.
Got a lot of farm representation on the board.
Yeah,
And in the county, you know.
I know, this county, we're still lucky that way, aren't we?
Yeah.
Very lucky.
All right, thank you.
Well, as long as you brought up that resolution, I have a question for you. So my understanding around the soil and water district is that the Farm Bureau appoints one member and the Grange appoints another member. So I guess I'm curious, like, if you could sort of distinguish, like, how are you different than the Grange, and what do those two appointments bring to the county, and also specifically to the soil and water board?
Yeah, you know, it's they're both farm organizations, and we think that, you know, everybody should work together on things, but it's kind of like at the national level, you've got the American Farm Bureau and you've got the National Farmers Union, and there's some different sort of, I guess for lack of a better word, you know, like all things in America, there's sort of different leanings and political perspectives on things. And the Farm Bureau, initially its role and job, and within internally it's becoming a bigger issue. Its job is I've been doing a lobbying organization, just trying to look at what is best thing economically for the farm industry. Whereas the Grange has gone, they've gotten more into some of the social policies as well. There have been, we have seen within Farm Bureau some kind of, and at times in our state policy meetings, a push to become more involved in some of the social issues, which we've been trying to sort of tamp down. Because really, when we're looking at policies, it's generally for us coming around to what is the best thing economically for farmers as a business. So I recognize that even me being here about policy issues, part of this is that we also realize that we need to do more policies in order to address the needs of farmers economically. And you have also on the other policy on the Farm Bureau, and this is why we're struggling with the young entrepreneurial farmers. There's a sense with them that the Farm Bureau is more of a large farm organization, where it seems like the Grange, not the Farmers Union, are often seen like small farm organizations. And that's something that we recognize as an issue that we need to change, so we can sort of capture some of those people, because the needs of small farms are often very different than the needs of the larger farms. So, you know, internally we've got our own issues to work through. I tend to be a big supporter of small entrepreneurial farmers, and I'm trying very hard to reach out to them more. And for them, it's also, you know, I tend to think of farmers very conservative, and a lot of younger entrepreneurial farmers are much more progressive. That's another bridge that we have to try to sort of cross. And that's a bit of what's going on. So there's a different perspectives of things. These different organizations want their different members on the different things.
Just anecdotally, do you have any sense of how active the Grange organizations are in Columbia County?
To my knowledge, not as active in Columbia County. They are active in in parts of the state. So,
With the exception of Copic, I know.
In Copic, there's over 100 members in the Copic Grange.
All right.
Yeah, Chad, I mean, there's a good
see,
turnout.
I'm not as familiar with that many people. I mean, again, it's very active in some parts of the state. Well, then we need to have a discussion.
Yeah, we'll have a discussion.
Yeah, because that's part of the thing, is we need to kind of bring these things together. As I said, at the national level, you find American Farm Bureau, the National Farmers Union, often at odds on policy, which is not beneficial to the food and agriculture industry as a whole. There are these different groups combating one another.
I have your number. I'll give you a call.
Do that, because I'm happy to come and talk to them, and there's always common ground somewhere where you can join forces on things.
That'd be great. Thank you.
I'm strong believer in that, so.
And one more question about the Soil and Water Board. Did I hear you right that you were interested in potentially making some changes to get more farmers on the soil, on the Soil and Water Board? Is that what you said?
No, I was just explaining, why these different organizations are having, the different perspectives and trying to get different people on the board. I mean, obviously, yeah, I'd love to have more farmers on the, don't like that. I've got more on everything, lovely, in more towns and everything else. Like I said, this county is doing pretty good.
It's very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
you
you.
very much.
Yeah, I'm happy with this. To come and talk to you now.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, that's a good thing. I've been taking it with me.
Leave that
Yeah, I
there.
wouldn't be training horses tomorrow if I was in the ER, would I?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. I'm sorry for running, but I have to get to a board meeting, so.
Okay, I need to backtrack. I skipped an agenda item, which is a motion to pay the bills. Treasurer's report in 5 minutes. We're in the clerk's office.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Those are important details. Next, I'd like to have Brenda Adams come up for the purposes of reading a resolution for Arab American Month. I'm sorry, not a resolution, proclamation.
Arab American Heritage Month. Throughout the month of April, it is important to highlight and celebrate the culture and heritage of the Arab Americans. This is the time to honor the contributions of Arab Americans and Arabic-speaking Americans to the wider American community. Arab Americans and Americans of Middle Eastern heritage have a long history in the United States that started when people of Middle Eastern descent first began to enter America in large numbers in the 1800s. Historians have noted these immigrants were the first wave of Middle Eastern people to immigrate to the United States circa 1875. Today, it is reported that over 4 million Arab Americans live in the United States, with many holding positions in the military, entertainment, politics, and every other aspect of social life. The Arab American story is the American story, one of diverse backgrounds and faiths, vibrant tradition, bold innovation, hard work, commitment to community, and stalwart patriotism, all coming together to accomplish something greater than any one of us. This month, we join together to celebrate the immeasurable contributions of Arab Americans to our country, and recommit ourselves to the timeless work of making sure that all people have the opportunity to achieve the American dream. Given under my hand and the privy seal of the County of Columbia at the Supervisor's Chambers in Hudson, New York, this 12th day of April, in the year of our Lord 2023, Matt B. Morrell, Chairman, Columbia County Board of Supervisors.
Thank you. Okay, next, I'd like to have our county clerk, Holly Tanner, come up to read a proclamation for Donate Life.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, everyone. I'm not going to read the whole proclamation because we've done this before, you've recognized, but April is Donate Life Month, which is extremely important. Donation of life, the gift of life, is extremely important year-round. There are approximately 8,000 people waiting for a life-saving gift of an organ in the United States. 400 New Yorkers die every year while waiting for an organ donation. So Columbia County has every April recognized Organ Donation Month, and I'm happy to say that our Commissioner of Motor Vehicles, Mark Schroeder, has really taken this to heart, no pun intended, but he's made it his goal to beat Colorado, and not in what you might think, because driving while high is not allowed, but he wants to beat Colorado in the percentage of people who are registered to be organ donors. Colorado is first in the nation. This is his goal. So we've done a lot of work in DMV offices. You can now not only register to be an organ donor when you get your license, But now when you're doing an original vehicle transaction, we're going to ask you if you want to become an organ donor. So it's just another way of outreach to give more people an opportunity to donate life. And so I want to thank Chairman of the board, Matt Morrell, and more specifically, I want to invite all of you to a press conference that I'm having next Friday. I'll send you an email out, but next Friday at 11 o'clock at the DMV office, we have a local person who received a life-saving liver transplant, Todd Farrell from Farrell's Car Care. You may know the name. He recently came out on Facebook with his story. And so I asked him privately if he'd like to come and talk about it at Donate Life Month, about what this donation meant to him. And he had a picture of his donor. You know, it's a tough thing, but it's a really heartfelt thing. So 11 o'clock, I'm going to present him with a Donate Life flag for his business. Senator Hinchy will be there. I've invited Assembly members, Dee Dee Barrett and Scott Benedict, and hopefully they can join us as well. And all of you, we'd love to see you. So thank you for recognizing April as Donate Life Month. And if you don't have that little heart on your license, you can come see me and we'll get that taken care of. And actually, I'd like to request the Chairman of Public Works, can I get a hitching post at my parking spot? Because I think I might start riding my horse to work after doing that whole business. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.
And last but not least, Supervisor Stats, about Small Business Week proclamation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman's proclamation for Small Business Week. But personally, I'm quite not sure why Arab Americans have recognized their month and small business owners recognize their I'm biased as business owners. So, but anyhow, April 30th, 2023 through May 6th, 2023 is Small Business Week in Columbia County. Whereas Columbia County recognizes and values the dedication and entrepreneurial spirits of small businesses that keep our local, regional, state, and national economy growing stronger, and observes April 30th through May 6th, 2023 as Small Business Week. Whereas the county works collaboratively with the Columbia Economic Development Corporation, Columbia County Chamber of Commerce, cities and towns, and other organizations forward the missions of helping our businesses grow and create new jobs within Columbia County. And whereas, because there are more than 1,900 businesses in Columbia County, the majority of which are small businesses that are vital to our community, we must remain vigilant in our support of entrepreneurs to create jobs and spur economic growth at all levels of our economy. And whereas the President of the United States has proclaimed National Small Business Week every year since 1963 to highlight programs and services available to entrepreneurs through the U.S. Small Business Administration and other government agencies. And whereas Columbia County supports and joins in this national effort to help America's small businesses do what they do best: grow their business, create jobs, and ensure that our communities remain as vibrant tomorrow as they are today. Now, therefore, be resolved that I, Matt Morrell, Chairman of the Columbia County Board of Supervisors, on behalf of citizens of Columbia County, hereby proclaim April 30th, 2023 through May 6th, 2023 a Small Business Week in Columbia County, and encourage all citizens to support small businesses who help Columbia County thrive. Given under my hand and privilege seal of Columbia County Board of Supervisors, Chambers of Hudson, New York, this 12th day of April 2023.
Thank you, Rick. Okay, I'm going to ask the clerk to read the resolutions.
Resolution 137 of 2023 to 154, 2023 by Supervisor Chemidas.
Mr. Chairman, I offer these resolutions for adoption.
Second the motion?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
Resolution 155 of 2023 to 176 of 2023 by Supervisor Whitell.
Mr. Chairman, I offer these resolutions for adoption.
Second the motion.
Mr. Chairman, could I ask for a roll call vote on resolution 155, please?
So let's vote on those resolutions. We'll pull 155 out.
Mr. Chairman, I actually propose that we table 172.
So I would also request that 172 get tabled There is information within the resolution that is false. I spoke to some members of economic development who did not realize that there is not a current proposal. So if you look at the sixth whereas clause, it states definitively that the Watershed Health Coalition has proposed significant changes to soil and water conservation districts law. Supervisor Chimides asked for those proposals, and we did get definitive answers today that there are no proposals currently. I am not opposed to the resolution asking for local input if changes are to be made, but I think it's reckless to vote on a resolution that is false. There is no proposal. Whereas clause after that says the proposed changes include, the next whereas clause, the proposed changes include. There's no proposal to look at. So how do we know what the proposed changes include? It comes from hearsay. It's coming down the pipes. I think we should table this. I think we should either reword the resolution so that it is a factual resolution that says if proposed changes are presented, we would like to have local input. Very solid statement, very true statement. But to state that there is a proposal that we would like input on when there is no proposal, I think is irresponsible as a government. And so I ask that it go back to economic development, being reworked into a factual statement, and come back to this board for a vote once it has factual information in it.
Okay, first of all, we have a motion and a second on the other resolutions. So all in favor? Aye. So in terms of 155, the request is a roll call vote.
So we just voted on everything other than 155 and 172?
Yeah, I'm a little confused too. What?
Well, I wasn't able to finish what we
All
were
right,
doing.
now,
I mean,
could you make it clear?
155 is the interim coroner, which was a supervisor made a request for a roll call.
Roll call
So that's-
vote, okay.
That gets pulled out and we'll do a roll call vote on that. 172 was asked to be tabled, and then the chairman took directive to let's get the other ones passed. So in my opinion and read of the room, 155 is due for a roll call vote and 172 is open for discussion.
Okay, and we're voting on everything else.
Okay, so let's deal with 155 first.
Okay.
Okay. Basil? Weigel?
Yes.
Owens?
Yes.
Simmons?
Yes.
Stats?
Yes.
Adams?
No.
Mettler?
No.
Collins?
Yes.
Riley? Eldridge?
Yes.
Helsley?
Yes.
Kirsten?
No.
Ligonia? Cousins? Mia? Jamitas?
No.
Lessman?
No.
Solera?
Yes.
Guzzi?
Yes.
Holtman?
So I would just like to state before my vote, I was a part of the interview. I thought both candidates were good. I felt very strongly that the other candidate was more qualified and that the majority of my colleagues on public safety voted for this candidate because he was the known quantity. And I would love to see the county move forward in a direction that isn't so much of a good old boy network. It's the guy I know, it's my friend, it's my uncle, and move forward in a direction of young, new, qualified, and for that reason, I'm going to vote no.
Moran?
I take offense to the good old boy statement, but I vote yes.
Nat?
Yes.
Skoda?
Yes.
2406 ayes and 1129.
Resolution passes. Yeah, you
Kim.
need to do a roll call on there.
No, we-
On the other.
For the record, I'd like to say that I've always been proud to be called a good old boy.
You are old. So I guess in 172, the request is to pull it or to rewrite it or
Yeah, I just want to make sure it's factual, and we found out today, Supervisor Mott found out today that it is not actually, there is no proposal, and the resolution speaks multiple times about a proposal that doesn't.
If I could, I mean, the wording of that resolution is pretty much word for word what NICEC approved at the conference that I went to, and that's where I got that wording. So, you know, yeah, and a number of other counties have done that. I think the concern was at the time that something would get slipped into the budget that would not be a bill that we could actually reference. So there was some rush from the Farm Bureau and NICEC to put this resolution forward. I think there's great support. You know, I know Ryan and Donnell both sat on our soil and water board. I used to do that with Supervisor Basson. There's a lot of important funding that comes to our soil and water board here locally in Columbia County, and I think it's important that the county continue to have representation on that board as well as the Farm Bureau. So I felt passionate about saying, getting out ahead of this to make our legislators understand that there's importance. With the concerns that are out there, I don't have a problem trying to table it and rewrite it a little bit, if that pleases the rest of the board as well too. But I do think that we should make that statement be held, but maybe it's settled down, but I think there is some action going on behind the scenes, you know, but I do want to be accurate in our statements.
Do you feel that there's some stuff that's in here that's not accurate?
So it's not that it's not accurate, but, you know, to Tistria and Michael's point that, you know, we're referencing a proposal that we can't put our hands on. You know, they're telling us that there was some backroom dealings is what New York State Farm Bureau believed to be going on. And so that's what they were stopped. That's what they were trying to stop. So they thought if we got this attention to the legislators, it might stop, but we can't, we don't have a proposed bill in front of us, so I do understand that. But at this moment in time, I spoke to the NICEC staffers today, and they said no legislator at this point has picked up on this and written a proposal. So I do think we have time to continue to get ahead of it.
So the proposal then would be to table it for a month.
Yeah, we'll bring something to economic development next month.
Supervisor Holmes, I need a motion.
All right, so we have a motion,
I'll second.
a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
To the point though, these measures have been brought in front of the New York State Association of Conservation Districts, who had a special meeting on it. I can probably get the minutes of that meeting concerning these removal of Grange and Farm Bureau members.
Yeah.
It was brought to their attention, so it'll be interesting to hear from Sam Casella or whoever the president of the NYACD is right now. I think it's still Sam Casella.
And really, at the end of the day, the therefore be it resolved language is fine. It's really just, there's 4 clauses that are in the whereas that say the proposed changes, the proposed changes. If you were to remove all the whereas clauses.
I do understand what you're saying, yeah.
Because the therefore be it resolved language is great. It's saying, hey, if you're gonna make any changes, we want input.
I think we have time to do it, so.
The other thing I think that's unclear is the use of the word election. It doesn't say what kind of election, a regional election. We don't know that the county would be excluded from holding that election in the region.
So what I was told from the NICEC representative today, I was his name that I spoke to up there, and you know, his concern was, he said in the proposed language, so he referenced some proposed changes, but he said that actually the way it was structured right now, they were trying to remove any county appointed people that we had on there. So, you know, our supervisors would be removed from any local boards, and how those positions would be filled, we don't know.
Right, but the devil's in the details.
Right, exactly.
I think, I just wanted to, the thing that I think it really stands out to me is that it says, without adequate input from local stakeholders, you know, it claims that there's a proposal, that the proposal itself insists that there's no input from stakeholders. And my understanding of the facts is that someone just brought this up on a conference call. There's no like written, it's notes from a conference call. It's not a proposal, but it claims a lot of things about this proposal,
right.
But I haven't heard any evidence the proposal specifically says we are going to ram this through New York State with no legislators knowing about it, never written down, and no input, right? So like it sort of makes a leap from like somebody might be making proposals about how to change the soil and water districts. That seems believable, but we're making claims about this proposal that they're actually trying to evade public input. And that part, I haven't seen any evidence that someone is trying to evade public input as opposed to trying to ask public input on changes.
I think we have time to flush that out now.
Yeah.
So, thank you. Okay. Do any supervisors have any other business to bring to the board?
Chairman, just a quick question, just following up, if we have any progress on the new census numbers? Thank you. We made any progress on moving forward 2020 census numbers?
Yes, we have actually, it's gonna go through committee this month in terms of the weighted vote issue and hiring someone to do the weighted vote for us. So that's, that'll be done at the county government meeting.
Okay.
And Hudson has, it was confirmed that Hudson has completed their redistricting, so.
And so Ray Kelly actually contacted the Clerks Association. And we found 3 or 4 different leads of an organization or a person or a mathematician that could do this. There's a former gentleman we used to use since the 70s every 10 years. He was the leading case that was Delaware County that went to the court in New York State and challenged doing this calculation. And he was the expert witness that testified and generated the calculation. He passed on since the last time we did it. So everybody's kind of scurrying, supervisors, boards of supervisors that still use a weighted vote. And there's quite a few. We're scurrying to try and find somebody. Well, we finally found somebody. Kelly went out to the first gentleman and he said, no, I'm not doing it anymore. So we had to go down the list a little bit and find somebody because it needs to have the teeth of the calculation that if he were challenged, he could go to court and actually support the calculation, how it's done. So we have a personnel, we have a proposed contract, we have Hudson's data, we have the census data. So when that gets approved next month, then we can get this gentleman working on the calculation and then you'll get a bunch of pages of calculation to look at after that and adopt as our new weighted vote.
Thank you.
So in another Patterns for Progress presentation last week, they said that the interim updates that they do, that the county had lost another 1,000, Columbia County had lost another 1,000 in population. So do we do this recalculation just based on the every 10 years on those numbers?
It'll be based on the 20
Okay, just want to be clear.
I have a question. How many counties use the weighted vote?
I don't know, what do we have, 62
There's
counties?
17 board of supervisors in the state. Last I knew, that could have changed, but that was.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. And they tend to be rural counties like Columbia, Washington,
Saratoga.
Cortland.
Saratoga's a board of supervisors.
Essex is a board.
How's that work? Think it's a good idea?
It's been upheld as sufficient to give one person, one vote status based upon the different sizes of the towns and their populations. I don't know how else you would do it otherwise. You mean, you can change the whole county government system. You can go to a legislature. But then in a small rural, that's policy determination for you guys to make. But in a small rural community like this, you're adding a whole other layer of government that residents traditionally didn't want to pay for.
Any other supervisors have anything to bring? Okay. I would just, before I close the meeting, I'd just like to congratulate our new coroner. And I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Oh, I'm sorry.
Just a brief public comment. CEDC thanks you along with the chamber, with the Columbia Forward program for the resolution on Small Business Week. We also, CEDC would like to invite you all to our annual meeting on Tuesday, April 25th at 7:30 at Kozel's. Dr. Dorothy Urschel, the president and CEO of Columbia Memorial Hospital, will be speaking on the intersection of healthcare, affordable housing, and workforce development. Thank you.
Okay.
So moved.
Motion to adjourn second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Thank you.